Hello, everyone. I wanted to talk to you guys about shadow work, but with my friend Maria, who is quite experienced. And I think that this conversation will be really helpful for a lot of you guys who are kind of confused about how to go about shadow work and the obstacles that you'll experience. So I have some questions and we're going to talk a little bit about it. And yeah, so how would you introduce yourself, Maria?
Well, I started my journey as a psychologist, and I graduated in 1993. Um, but since then, I have been on the seeker, looking for spiritual wisdom, and I have become now an existential psychologist. My work is to help others to find the path, as well as continue progressing myself.
Yeah, she's helped me quite a bit finding the path, and that's why I thought this conversation might be very interesting. So, so the questions I have, let's go into the first one. What is the importance of shadow work for people on the path?
Well, I think that shadow, we need to define what shadow is first to understand
Yeah,
why it's
yeah,
important. Shadow is everything that we are not conscious of, that is running scripts, and we are not aware what's going on. How do we get this shadow? These shadows come because, in our bringing up or socially, we are told that aspects of our personality are not good enough or are not acceptable because of the social context. So we learn to hide those aspects of ourselves. But the thing is, they don't always are negative. Sometimes they are positive traits that we have hid because people have taught us that we were being annoying.
yeah.
Okay. But in itself, those traits probably are gifts that we haven't really cultivated.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Those loving kind of giving parts of yourselves kind of get pushed away because I guess it's not useful to give. It's more
Exactly.
we're kind of thought to, take, take, take. That's the kind of world we're put into. It's good to take. Let's let's consume all this material stuff. We have to take more. And it's like provoked by everyone around us to do that. And so we naturally kind of close away our giving nature, which is our real nature
Mm-hmm.
to give.
Yeah, that's one example.
Yeah.
For example, if you are a joyful person, a joyful child, and like playing all the time, but that's annoying for your parents, that gets also, pushed into the shadow because you get repressed by your parents.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the kind of thing, that gets pushed into the shadow. All those aspects that other people don't like.
And do you think it's usually depending on this is how does it depend? Like, what's the interaction between the family and the society? How does what kind of makes a difference, because it's obviously different shadows for different parts of the world, depending on the societies. Would you say that?
Of course, because emotions are cross-cultural. We all have the same emotions.
Yeah.
It's how we express them that changes, and what expressions are acceptable in a society and which are not. For example, in Spain, over dramatize about things and overreact is acceptable, is the way forward, is what people expect of you. That if something happens, that you make a big fuss of it. If you are in Ireland or in Scotland, you can't make a fuss unless you are basically dying.
Yeah. Also, what I've realized is that I can watch someone overreact like crazy, but I realize it's so easy to judge that person. Like, oh, that person's overreacting. But in their experience, that's perfectly adequate for what's happening inside of them. They're just kind of showing that part of themselves. But for all the onlookers, it's like, whoa, look at this crazy person. And I feel like in relationships, especially when a girl or a guy freaks out at each other for really minor things, it's not never the thing. It's always reflecting of that shadow part of us, you know? So it's kind of like that too. Um, so what would be the important, like, why would someone consciously want to do this shadow work? Like, what's the importance of it for someone who's seeking on the path?
Well, the shadow work allow us to make these shadows conscious. If we make them conscious, we can get to know them and eventually accept those aspects of ourselves, or change them if we can change them, but at least accept them as part of ourselves.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the suffering comes from the fact that we don't like them and we don't want to accept them. And we rebel against being untidy, for example. And then you get into a fight with yourself. And a lot of the time, those fights are unconscious. So you don't know why you're angry. And you're angry because you are not accepting that part of yourself that you don't like.
Yeah, a lot of the emotional kind of conflict is somewhat a bit like you just don't understand why it's happening. You're like, why am I so emotional? And then the shadow work is kind of making you aware of how to like truly understand those emotions, I suppose. Because it can be a lot of the emotions I still experience, I still have no clarity on, but I feel like I'll get there, but I don't know why I feel the way I do a lot of the time, you know? I lack that understanding. So shadow work, yeah, I think when I started to do it consciously, it started to make me more aware of the actual, like, all of this emotional suffering I was experiencing. And it's really changed that experience of that. So yeah. Also, one question that a lot of people have is, why do shadows never disappear? Why do they keep coming back? And why is it that you seem to be doing something that seems right, but the shadow just keeps, like that, you keep seeing it happen. You keep seeing the same part of you always coming back.
There's a few reasons to explain that. One is that we work different aspects of the shadow. The more our consciousness rises, the more depth there is to the things that we are working with. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah. The more you're aware of, the more it goes deeper, I suppose.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The more that I'll give you an example of how we create shadows, all right? And they become completely unconscious. When I was little, I used to love playing with money. Just, I would make little mountains and I would, play with coins, and it was just an entertaining activity for me. And I would always go into trouble because my mom would say, "Don't do that because that's dirty." So I grew up in the belief that money is dirty. So what's the consequence? That, I don't charge for my work on a fair basis because I have this unconscious idea that money is something dirty. So that's how shadows, are created and how they rule our lives afterwards. So that's the importance of, really identifying where these shadows are coming from and where our core beliefs are coming from. Because a lot of the time are coming from interpretations of my child that did about the world around them. That's why the shadow work is always there, because they were interpretations that I made about what people told me when I was a child.
Yeah.
Okay.
And how would someone how would they work it out? What those, especially the childhood things like those interpretations and vows and stuff like that that we take. How do you kind of go about discovering your interpretation? Because your whole life you've kind of lived by that. So it's like it's just your life, you know. It's hard to kind of pull yourself out and see it that you've interpreted it a certain way, but the truth is a different way, you know. How do you go about interpreting or getting clarity on those interpretations, and how, you know, of course you have to do that because the interpretations are kind of causing you to have this inner conflict. How do you understand the interpretations or get the clarity on your interpretations, especially from, you know, your childhood?
I think it's very important to do some work around understand your emotional reactions.
Yeah.
Why do I react the way I do? Where is it that, particularly when other people make us upset or angry or annoyed, what is it that they are doing that annoys you? But also, I want to make something, because I think it's really important to understand that shadows are also positive. And when you meet someone and you say, "Oh, I really like that about that person,"
Yeah.
think that that is also a reflection of yourself.
Yeah.
So it works in both aspects, and sometimes it's easier to see the shadows in in the positive light. Like when you admire someone, you can sit there and say, okay, what is it that this person brings up for me? What is it that they touch? What do they remind me of?
Is this maybe why people are trapped in envy? Why they can't get out of envy? Maybe? Yeah.
Yes.
Because that's also something I thought about for a while, because I really admired people, but I was like, you know, I was just always admiring it because I knew I have that in me, but I was just stuck in this admiring. Like there was like, I believed I could never be like that. So I just stayed back in envy, you know, sit back in the back seat of envy and watch everyone do their amazing things that I can't do. So it's my shadow inside of me, right? That's the shadow part of it.
Exactly.
Yeah. And
It's
yeah.
sorry.
And how do you, this is something that I also have a lot of problem with. How do you deal with intense emotion as you are interacting with your shadow? Like the person reflecting trauma onto, or the trauma inside of you, you know, how do you deal with those emotions when you're with the person? Because a lot of time it's a bit uncomfortable to be with the person who's reflecting it, but have all this turmoil. You have to kind of keep pushing it down, because you don't want to maybe, you know, start having a fit or you know, a breakdown in front of people, you know, who have the shadow. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
I think that the only way is with love
Okay.
and compassion, because when you feel compassion for the other person, you realize that actually whatever it is that that person was doing that was annoying you, it was a reflection of yourself, and you are able to accept that. I'll give you an example. I was in a course, and there was this woman that was really doing my head in. It was so annoying, so annoying. And I couldn't work out why I was so annoyed with her. I just was really annoyed. So at one of the breaks, I just went to her and said, listen, do you mind if I give you a hug? And she's, no, of course. And I gave her a hug with all my love. And then I understood that, what I was finding annoying was that she is very vocal, and she was, interrupting all the time and talking all the time. And I was like, that's just like me,
Yeah.
But I had to go that step first to, bridge that love in order to understand what was the behavior that was really annoying me. Because I was seeing myself reflected on her, and I was seeing something that I didn't like, and I didn't fully accept. And that's why the other person annoys you and produces these really strong emotional reactions, because it's your internal conflict really was that hard, not the other person.
Yeah. There's probably a lot of, you know, if I'm with someone who makes me feel incredibly anxious, and I start like having all the symptoms, I think it's so easy to be overwhelmed by shame, because you're with someone and it's just, like if I'm with a girl and I feel all these anxiety feelings, I'm like, it's just a girl, but I have all of this like built up stuff about it. And I have all the shame on top of that for having those things. I think that's a big thing. It's like the shame for the shadow, the shame for having that repressed parts of us, because it's not even like those shadows aren't even ours. You know what I mean? They're not. It's not like we created the shadows, but then we have the shame for it, so it kind of becomes ours by the shame. Like a lot of people would have too much shame to hug that person. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. The thing is, we create the shadows in a situation where we were being ashamed.
Yeah, definitely.
That, because when that's the thing about how children are raised in our society. We teach them that they are accepted and loved when they behave in the way that we want, and they are not accepted and loved when they behave in ways that we don't like. So people understand or learn that, when you are being accommodating or you are behaving in an acceptable way, then you are acceptable and you are loved. That's where the shame comes from the fact that you are not being able to comply with society's expectations.
Yeah, it's just a shame in expressing yourself as you are. It's just crazy because that's what really that's what really pulls you out, I think, of all those shadows. You just keep naturally expressing yourself, even if like, oh, everyone's gonna look at me and I'm gonna be judged, and like all those thoughts start to come up. That's where those thoughts were born from, like that. Oh, well, you shouldn't do that because that's bad and that will make us look bad and you're gonna be a bad boy.
And they lock us up in that duality of being a good girl or a bad boy. I mean, a good girl or a bad girl, or a good boy and a bad boy, when there's not such duality.
Yes.
When we talk to a child, we should tell them, we love you, but that behavior is not acceptable.
Yes.
And
Yes.
separate the person from the behavior. But the other thing that really does my head in is when we tell a child, stop doing that. What is it that you want them to stop? Because that child might be going like, so should I stop what I'm thinking, what I'm doing, what I'm feeling? What is it I need to stop? What is it that I am being rejected for?
Yeah, I can imagine what goes on in the child's head, like uh, yeah. So also, what I see a lot in especially spiritual communities is bypassing, like trying to get around it, because shadow work is the most, I think, for me, by far has been the most grueling work, because you're pulling yourself out of decade-old patterns, and there's so much like physical resistance and, oh, let's, procrastination, and just so much, all of these kinds of ways that we used to get around it. So is it possible to remove the fears and the all those things without confronting your shadow, like as if there's some like let's say I could, let's say I was doing breath work, right? That's what I like doing. I like doing these kind of shamanic breath work things. And I experienced like a lot of releasing of fears, but I do wonder, how does that intertwine with actual, like, how does that influence my shadow work, or does it even influence shadow work? Do you know what I mean? Like,
The thing is, the shadow work is in the shadow.
yeah.
So unless you do shadow work, you're not going to find it.
Is there no, there's no correlation between doing something that like removes, let's say I cried out or something, I like a very intense catharsis of letting go of all these kind of wounds, like let's say I had a lot of inner child like crying and crying. How does that play in, does that play at all into the shadow of you know, how the inner child finds its shadows, like those people that you want to attach yourself to? Does it at all, like, you know, does it all pull the bricks out of those shadows? Do you know what I mean?
Well, I think that, you know, in order to let go of something, you have to be aware of it. And in the case of the shadows, you are not aware of them.
Yeah.
So to try to get rid of something that you don't know what it is very difficult. Because the shadows is not just through our personal experience. You know, shadows was something that Carl Jung talked about and introduced the concept. To introduce the concept of archetypes in terms of, you know, we all play different archetypes all the time. Some of them are conscious, some of them are not. And obviously we have a collective consciousness. So as species, we have shadows as well. It's not just the shadows that you accumulate through your life. It's also the shadows that we have as a species. And the beliefs that we hold true as a species that we need to let go in order to be able to progress. So there is some of the work that we can do on an individual level, but there is some of the work that we need to do on a collective way. And that's the reason why there's this massive awakening now in this time and point in history, so that it will allow us to do some of that shadow work so that we can evolve to the next level as a group.
Yeah, and I think that you know, a lot of people misunderstand what it means to take responsibility, because it's actually the best way to go about things. If you just take responsibility for everything, you just say, okay, now I have the power, you know, now I have control, now I really have control. And I think it's a bit harder to take responsibility for things that seem like they just, you've never done to create them, you know, you've never done anything in your life, but they're there somehow. And you know, I wonder, how do you keep track, you know, how do you keep track of these collective things? How do you see the difference between the individual shadow and how it takes form in the collective shadow? Do you know what I mean? How can you see something has come from your conditioning, how something has came from the kind of the whole collective conditioning?
In reality, you know, even the personal, sorry, even the personal conditioning are coming from a social conditioning, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because obviously, you know, I'm from our family. So in a family, you know, for example, you might have in the shadow the fear of being poor. That will be because some of your ancestors were really poor and really struggled.
Mm.
So that stays in the memory of the family.
Yeah.
in case carried on.
Yeah.
Okay. And then we have the societal, shadows. For example, right now, it's about give and take instead of give, or how do we ethically work in the world?
It's very transactional, I think. A lot of nearly every relationship it's just all transactional. And yeah.
And that's the thing, we need to learn how to love unconditionally, because when we do, the shadows don't matter,
Yeah.
because the fact is that the shadows are there because they need to protect us. If we were living in an open world where you can be who you are, you don't need to create shadows.
Utopia.
Because you can be open, and you can, and suddenly, I mean, the thing is that they are in the shade because we don't allow it to exist with us, because it's like death. Our society doesn't like the idea of death.
Yeah.
We don't talk about death. We don't, for example, would it not be lovely that, you recorded your parents to show your children what their grandparents were like, and to have, a memory of them forever, for instance? But we don't do that because we don't want to accept that death is part of our life, and we keep fighting it.
Yeah.
And we suffer so much trying to avoid something that is unavoidable.
Yeah, the one thing that's actually unavoidable.
The one certain thing is that we are gonna die, and we don't prepare people for it.
Yeah.
That's why things get pushed into the shade, into the shadow, because we don't want to deal with it.
Yeah, I guess it's just that little nudge from avoiding something completely, really, to just embracing it. It's just so much better to embrace it. But it's when you're in the pattern of avoidance, it seems like it's so much easier to just stay in a little crevice that's a little more comfortable, to just take one step out. It's almost it's really monkey-like, isn't it? It's crazy. But yeah.
I mean, it's true. I think that the first step is the most difficult.
Yeah, definitely.
To just say, okay, actually, there are negative things or things that I don't like about myself. Because the other thing is, we are in a society that is really hypocritical.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
And we go about with these masks all the time, pretending to be people that we are not. And it's interesting that there are people who never take their masks off, not even for themselves.
Yeah, I was in that situation, and it really bites you, and it comes back to bite you because words are so empty. They really are. They can be just complete emptiness. So, yeah.
So that's why it's important to work with your shadows, because otherwise, you are an empty shell.
Yeah. And I guess the last question is, and I think it's important, can you do shadow work without certain existential insights, like understanding certain existential things? Like, can I just talk to someone on the side of the street and just introduce the whole concept of shadow work? Could they do that the next day? Because certain existential understandings make shadow work, to me, make it so much more sensical. It makes so much more sense to me when I have the certain insights. But when I don't have the insights, it seems very conceptual, and a little bit, I would imagine I would be very doubtful, because I can't even remember. I heard the term shadow work years ago, but I couldn't really get my head around it. I wasn't sure what I was doing, but it did make some sense. But how important is it to have existential insights, to like understand who you are, and to question things existentially, you know, why you're here, and why you're alive, and what is life, and you know, those things. How does it play into shadow work as the practice of confronting your shadows and doing the work?
I guess that if you are asleep and you are happy going to work every day and, you know, paying your mortgage and getting drunk on the weekends and, you know, doing what you do, shadow work is not going to be a factor in your life. You're not going to even think about it. Because actually, you know, those shadows are the ones that are keeping you where you are.
Yeah.
It's like your cocoon, you know, which is, I mean, I think that what we need to get away from is the judgment. We are all in the path. We are
Yeah.
just at different stages.
Yeah, that's true.
So there are people who have come here to experience different things.
Mm-hmm.
So we can't say that, you know, somebody who's homeless is less or more than somebody who is, you know, an executive paying his mortgage and doing a finance job. You know, that is the experience they have chosen to take. And we can never judge what other people's path are, because, you know, we are not in their shoes. So we don't know what they have come to learn here or experience. So I think that from that point of view, when we stop judging ourselves and others, it's so much easier to do shadow work, because it's not something negative, it's not something bad. It's just another aspect of who you are. You know, I think that the problem comes from the word shadow. You know, it's like, oh my God, that is something really bad.
Yeah.
You know, now I have to exercise all my demons and, you
Yeah.
know, deal with all of that. And it's not about that. It's about understanding that, you know, in order to have light, I need to have shadow.
Yeah, it's
You
not
can't have one
necessarily
without the other.
bad. It's not wrong. It's just like becoming whole. You have to bring those parts into yourself.
Yeah. And understand that they are parts of yourself that are useful sometimes.
Yeah, and I would also say like I don't think there's anything wrong. Personally, I just don't think there's nothing wrong. Even what you may see other people's behaviors that seem extremely gross, like cruel, is, to me, it's just, if you just understand, there is a way to just understand that person. That's all. Like if you just understand it, there's no wrong then. There's no need to impose a right or wrong dualistic thing that actually causes both of you to suffer. Because then you don't understand that person, then you can't actually help that person truly. And if you impose your right or wrong, that person feels very you know, very inclined to put up the defense when they feel attacked. But if you bring that caring understanding, then that person can be helped. And when you're always coming from understanding, you know, it's so much easier, I think, to live like that for yourself. It removes a lot of the suffering inside of you when you really intend to just understand things, understand like your shadows. And
I would go a step further. Sometimes you don't need to understand, you just need to respect.
well, yeah. You don't need to, I don't think you need to figure out anything. I don't think you need to figure out, but what I think it's helpful to also project yourself, cognitive, you know, cognitive projection or empathy into someone. And you can really try to understand them, you know, not to figure anyone out, like not try to make, like, you know, make sense of it in your head and then just leave it, or don't bother with it or something like that. But also, yeah, just respecting this other person is the way they are for reasons that you will never know is also a good approach. Which is most probably going to be most of the time. It's, you know, it's going to just be like you're just going to respect people
You know,
like that.
it's interesting. If you go to the forest, and you go around looking at the trees, you know, you don't think that that tree is, you know, black or negative or, you know, whatever. You just understand that the trees are the way they are because that's the way they have grown.
Yeah.
And you don't judge them and you don't expect them to be the way you want them to be. As soon as we come to a group of people, we forget that and we start going like, that person should be like that or should be like that. And all our expectations kick in. But they are just that, expectations.
Yeah.
Just about understanding that, you know, the fact that I have an expectation about how another person should be doesn't mean that they have to comply with it.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah, I guess so. It's not, it's not that important to, you know, be, you know, very insightful or to be enlightened in any certain stage, but just you know, knowing that you can respect people as they are, and then you can, you know, but I think you can only really see that in other people as you see it in yourself. Because when you understand that you can only understand yourself, you know, like you just are an effect to causes, that's all. There's no wrong about it. And when you see that in yourself, you just see it in everyone, I think. It
Yeah,
just works like
definitely.
that. You can't, I don't think if you, until you see it in yourself, you won't be able to really see clearly with other people, you know, for sure. So yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. So yeah, this has been a really nice interview, Maria. Thanks a
Thank
lot
you.
for talking to me. And yeah, guys, if you like this talk, please subscribe to my channel. Thank you. Okay. Have a good one.
See you later.
Okay.